Tell me a little bit about music the kind of music that you would hear in your house when you were growing up.
Oh, I mean, my parents had really good music taste. My dad was actually a songwriter in his own right. He was a principal first, but he would love to like listen to James Taylor, Van Morrison. My mom really loved Joni Mitchell, Sinead O'Connor, Cat Stevens. Lots of like folk artists, but folk that kind of bled its way into pop sometimes as well, I think, in subtle ways. I mean, I don't know if people would call James Taylor pop, but I can definitely hear that there's some remnants of that in his music. So I grew up with like a wide range of folk artists mostly, I would say. And unlike most kids who sort of rebel their parents' music, I really loved it. I really thought they had fabulous taste. I still do.
When you were a little girl, were you always singing, like wherever you were?
Yeah, I don't really remember a time when I didn't kind of define myself as a singer, which sounds wild to think of now. But I think because music was just in my house and it was so encouraged to do these sing-alongs. And like I think actually it sort of came out of necessity at first, because when my parents first divorced, I think I would have been about 3 or 4. And I would miss my mom. And so my dad would like pull out the guitar and he would be like, all right, well, let's think of 3 songs that you'd like to sing. And he would play them for me. And I would apparently like sing along with him and try to learn the words and think of the stories. And it really helped settle me before bed. So he kept this routine going where he would play 3 or 4 songs before bed at night. And I would sing along. And I can remember at an early age, I don't know, 6, 7, kind of really feeling like these stories would really transport me. And that I could try on feelings that felt like grown-up feelings that I hadn't really experienced before and really kind of escape into them. And I can remember actually one night crying, listening to a sad song, like a Rod Stewart cover. And my father was like, well, are you okay? Do you want me to stop? And I remember being like, no, keep going.
Wow.
Like, this is sort of the best part of my day. So I really felt like music was a bridge between my 2 families. And I was really looking for any kind of connecting factor at that age. So it was something I clung on to early.
I read that it was Nothing Compares to You, Sinead O'Connor's version of that song that really was like kind of an awakening moment. You were probably around 4, 5 or 6 when that song was originally released. Do you remember that song, when that song kind of struck you as something different? Because it was a remarkable cover of that song.
Well, isn't it a joyful thing to remember the time in your life when, I don't know if you as a kid felt this, where you would sing for the joy, the simple joy of what it felt like to sing out loud and to hear your voice in an empty space and to hear it maybe echo in a bathroom or something like that too. And I can remember reaching for songs in the shower or songs in certain places when I was walking alone to go to for the simple joy of singing. And Sinead O'Connor's music was always that, because it was so soaring. It was so these melodies were just beautiful. And so I think it was also the closest thing that my parents had introduced me to, like, again, a bit more pop leaning stuff, that being a Prince cover especially. Something about that really attracted me. And so, yeah, I think also in terms of like all-time favorite voices, I mean, Sinead O'Connor, Billie Holiday, she's in the running of the greats to me. So I was really struck by that.
Yeah. Carly, when did you start to feel like you wanted to pursue singing or acting or something? I mean, do you remember moments when you were a kid where people would say to you or to your parents, like, you know, she's different. Like, there are other good kids who can sing well here in Mission, but she's a bit different. There isn't quite anyone doing what she's doing. Do you ever remember hearing that as a kid?
I mean, my parents came from the era of like, tell your kids that they can be anything that they want to be, right? And so I grew up with like teachers who were very much like, if you work hard and if you care about something. So it wasn't that they didn't see the impossibility of a job like this, but they were very much all about the dream. And I I just kind of, in the same way that my brother loved hockey, and I just loved singing. So I think I was doing a lot of it. And once they saw, that I could maybe like keep a tune and like get through a song without losing my way a bit, I think that it started to become like a little party trick where my dad would bring out the guitar and I would sing for the family or sing in smaller little events. And then I think the first time we ever thought to kind of go outside the family with it was my father had found out about this talent show that was local in Mission, BC, and they thought, he asked me, would you like to sing in front of people? And I was about 7 years old, and I said, yes, of course, that sounds great. And he's like, well, we have to practice. So we went into like the garage every night, and we were practicing Beauty and the Beast and Eternal Flame by the Bangles. And so we practiced and practiced and practiced, and then I remember the day that we did the show. I think I was just 7, so I don't know if it was great or if it was just that I was 7 and I could get through it. But it was a pretty big reaction, and we won the talent contest. And at that time, it was like, I think they gave me $400, and I was like, I'm rich. I quit. This is my whole life is set. I was so happy, and I think I left there feeling quite at home in that light and that kind of energy, and sort of excited that I could hold the attention of a room for a second and try to transport them. I think the way that my father transported me in the sing-alongs before bed at night. Right after that, I started doing these musicals, like these homegrown, like Little Orphan Annie and The Wiz and Grease, and just like, I don't know, high school musicals basically. And I think around the time I was in elementary school, I started performing with the high school jazz band. So I would perform with them as well too. So I started to get a little bit of opportunity just in my very small town of Mission, but it was enough community support as well as my family support to feel kind of like, I don't know, being the dreamer that I was, that maybe I could keep seeing where this would go.
You were performing in musical theater, and I think that's really what your focus was. Did you also, like, when did you start to experiment with writing your own songs, or even learning how to play the guitar?
Well, first of all, I still think my father is one of the greatest songwriters of all time. So I had a really good teacher. And I think all it takes is like seeing somebody show you a skill, and then it just doesn't seem as unreachable. And so in the same way where he would play like a James Taylor song, he'd also like play one of his, and I couldn't tell the difference. I was just like so blown away that he was capable of making something that wasn't there before that I could sing along to. And so I didn't really put the fact that I was going to write a song into my head. It actually just kind of came quite naturally, the way that feelings come quite naturally. And I think I was in high school, and I had a bit of a crush on some guy, and I didn't know how to handle it. And I started to write him a letter, and my letter started to have like a cadence to it when I was reading it back to myself, and it started to kind of have pause, and then all of a sudden these rhymes. And before you knew it, I kind of had a melody in mind to it. And then now I'd sort of almost like changed focus. It was less about the boy, but I was almost looking for a guitar to see if I could figure out how to put this thing to life. And I remember showing my dad, because I had borrowed his guitar, but I didn't know any chords. So I just found the strings that would help. And I showed him like a W on the guitar, and he's like, that's a D. And then he showed me the rest of the things to be able to pull off the making of, I think my first song was called Dear You, and it was a letter to a boy.
Oh, wow. I don't want to put you on the spot, but do you remember any of it?
Yeah, I'm sure I could send it to you. It's pretty bad. It's like, dear you, I'm still thinking about you, and I can't seem to get you from my mind. It was very like a letter. And then it's true, I imagine us together, and I can't pretend it doesn't feel just fine. My dear, dear, dear you, I'm craving to be near you. And it just like went on like that.
Would you go in your bedroom and write songs like as a kid and as a teenager?
After that, I was surprisingly off to the races. I have to give like credit where credit's due to my family, because I think a kid can like stumble out of their room with an idea and play it for a couple people, and they'll be like, yeah, that's okay. But they were like kind of amazed and excited, that I had like, at least like, yeah, I remember them being very encouraging of like, oh, well, maybe you should try that again kind of vibe. And I got really excited about this new sort of discovery I was falling into. And it was around this time that I went to a performing arts college. And so fast forward now, like from high school to age 17, I think I went to the Canadian College of Performing Arts. And this was also like to the dismay of my parents. Like they were excited for me, but they were a little bit like, weren't you going to become like a music teacher? Like you should be going to like the school for that. But this school was much more aimed at almost preparing one for Broadway or something like that. It was singing, dancing, and acting school, basically my dream school. And it was a 1-year program. And I went and I brought my little acoustic guitar. My mom and my stepdad had bought me, and that's around the time when I really started to take off. And in terms of writing weekly. And so I would go to college, I would do my lessons, and I'd come home, and I would lock myself kind of away. And just started to pen these tunes. And by the time I had finished that year of school, I had this really strong feeling that, no, I think that musical theater is fun, but I want to pursue songwriting. And what's the next road for that? And the scary answer when I asked myself what the question was that I didn't know what the answer was, but I thought that I had to probably move back to the city and figure it out.
Because that year at the Performing Arts College in Victoria on Vancouver Island, like that, as you say, they were preparing you for a life in theater. Like you guys went to New York and saw Broadway shows, and you had vocal lessons and dancing and acting and all the things that you would need to do to maybe start getting in roles in theaters in Vancouver, and then maybe Toronto, and then maybe New York, but you realized that was not what you wanted to pursue, that actually you want to maybe become a songwriter.
Yeah, there was something really wild about being on stage and taking over the role of another character. And I loved the escapism of it. It was really fun, but there was something so thrilling and brave about just emoting something that was secret and wondering if there was somebody else who felt something similar. It really tapped into this type of connection that I was really craving, I think. And so I do remember coming back to my parents, and imagine I've got 4 teacher parents who are sort of already a little concerned that I've taken a left turn instead of the right turn. And the agreement, just so you know, with this is that I would go to this 1-year program, and then I would go to UBC or Cap College, and I would finish my teacher's degree. And my dad was sort of like, if you even become a substitute, then like on the days off, you can play at a couple coffee shops. This will be great. And I think what I had to tell them, I'm like, you've kind of created a monster, because you've told me my whole life I can do anything, and now I want to go do it. So I end up coming home and sort of saying, I want to make a go at this. I don't know what that looks like, but I'm going to move to the city. And they were very gentle, but they were very firm about, if you're not going to be going to university, then you're kind of on your own, and you got to figure this out. So then began the era of my life of many minimum wage jobs and living in Vancouver and starting a bohemian lifestyle of figuring it out.
Yeah, this is, I think, 2005, and you're in Vancouver trying to figure out how to make a living as a singer-songwriter, and as you mentioned, just doing whatever you could do. Like, what were some of the jobs that you did in Vancouver just to kind of pay the rent?
I got a bartender certificate. So I was working at the Media Club as a bartender. I was working at a coffee shop barista called Trees Organic Coffee, where the pastry chef assistant actually quit. So I took over as the pastry chef assistant. So I was there at 4 in the morning, and then I would go till 1. I'd go home and nap, and then I'd go to my bartending gig. Wow. And then Thursday nights I would play acoustic sets at the Anza Club. And I also started my own coffee, singer-songwriter night at the coffee shop that I worked at. And I was sleeping on a girl's, her still a friend of mine, and that's sort of where I stayed. And she was right on Davie Street in Vancouver. And it really was, my parents hadn't X'd me out. They were still deeply concerned on the sidelines, being like, she'll come home anytime now. But what they didn't realize is that I was just flourishing in this newfound freedom. And I was also, I think there was even a couple times where I couldn't make the hydro bill, and my girlfriend Che and I would busk on the street to cover the extra $60 to get through the month. But I never really felt that I knew what the plan was. But when I look back at those years, those were the years I was really figuring it out. I was figuring out, I was learning a lot about songwriting, first of all, but I also was discovering that I was so much happier doing this and not knowing necessarily where it was going to go than anything else.
So you're living in Vancouver, and that was your life. I mean, presumably, I mean, were there like A&Rs or like label people in Vancouver that you were auditioning in front of or pursuing anything like that at all?
I was trying, basically. I was doing that, the good old fashioned, like from the movies, like in an envelope with your like little demo CD and your resume and your headshot. Like I was dropping things off at places. Like I will say that I've had a hustle in me from like day one. And I do think that if there was a thing to do or an idea, like I remember one time looking for work on the Georgia Strait, and that's just like a newspaper in Vancouver, and looking for a job as a singer, and I couldn't find anything, but I saw a job for like a saxophone player in a jazz band, and I called them and I was like, so I know you're looking for a saxophone player, but would you like a singer instead? And I got the gig. Like there were certain little things that I was doing to try to get by, but also looking long term of how to turn this into, really developing into a proper career was also on my mind. And those were two different strategies. Like one, like pay the rent, and then one, where is this going? But it really, like when I look back on like big break sort of things, none of those things like really bit right away for me. I had like a couple good meetings and like a couple good opportunities like that. But it wasn't until Canadian Idol that I sort of, and I didn't even know that it was going to work out for me, but I ended up having a little bit more of a leg up.
So let's talk about Canadian Idol. This is 2007, and you went to the open auditions tell me, anybody can see your audition video, which is so cool. It's so cool to see you there. What do you remember? I mean, of course, you can see the video but what do you remember about that experience?
I mean, there was a lot going on around my time in that life, that period of my life. I think I had been in the city for a hot minute now. And I don't want to say it like chewed me up and spit me out, but there was definitely this feeling of like, okay, where is this going? Like, what's the next plan here? Because I really did want to build the thing, but it was also, I wasn't sure what the next step was. And I was, remember how I said I was in high school when all those drama productions, I was actually quite close to two teachers in my high school. One was Beverly Holmes and one was David Fryer. And they were both teachers who I think when you said, was there someone at Mission who kind of believed in you beyond your parents? It was those two people. And I was still in touch with Bev, and she was the one that told me about this audition. And I was like, that's not how it's going to work for me. And she's like, who do you think you are to know how it's going to work or if it's going to work? The whole idea of chasing a dream is that you knock on every door. You don't know what's going to open for you. Canadian Idol could be the thing or it could not, but like, you got to try. And I was like, oh, she's right. It's actually been like kind of life advice of like, don't pretend that you know what your destiny is or how things are going to work out for you. All your job is to show up and have energy to like be open. And so she drove me that day. And by the time I got to that audition, I remember thinking, I'm only going to be on TV this one time. I might as well make it count. So the rule was you weren't supposed to write or sing your own song. But I brought a guitar and I was like, I'm doing it. Because I thought if there's a chance that it'll air, I don't know what I thought, but I thought if I'm going to be there, I'm going to be there authentically. So it felt rebellious and it felt like I'll be in and I'll be out and it'll be done. So the reaction and their feedback of like allowing me through, I remember kind of feeling a little like, wow, that's not what I expected to happen. And that shock continued throughout the season. So every time that they would keep me around, I can remember calling my father or calling my family and being like, I'm still here. Isn't that weird? Like, what's going on? So it was quite a ride.
Yeah, I mean, as you say, you played your own original piece, and you would have ended up placing third in Canadian Idol. But that exposure led you to get a manager, and you released a record, I think, the next year in 2008. your debut record. That record, Tug of War, did quite well in Canada. You got, gold certification in Canada, but I don't think it was released beyond Canada, and I think in Japan, of all places. I don't think it was released originally in the U.S. And so, on the one hand, like, you had all this exposure on Canadian Idol, and you had a chance to make a record. On the other hand, that was like it wasn't like all of a sudden everything changed. Like,
No.
you were still grinding and still had, you had to wait tables.
I remember being in the top 10 of Canadian Idol and thinking the real race begins as soon as this show is done. Like, that's when the real competition is going to start for all of us, of like, how do we use this exposure? And I was very much thinking, what's the plan? What's the plan? What's the plan? What's the plan? And I think around the top 5, when we were looking at the Canadian Idol contract, I remember thinking coming second would be perfect, because winning, you're locked for life. And so second would be great. I'll take third though. And then I was very lucky to be in third, or even top 10 at all. So when we got back and I started to kind of look at what the next goal was, it wasn't like there wasn't a 1, 2, 3 step of like, this will get success now. So I think that the thing that I felt like I had in my corner was the songwriting aspect. So I was able to put some songs out, get some radio play, and then get back to waitressing. I can remember waitressing a couple tables, and my songs would be playing in the background.
Wow.
Kind of it being kind of I remember even having one table that was like strongly like reacting, and they didn't really like the song, and I was like trying to hide myself while I was like serving them wine, being like, Jesus Christ, but being at the same time like secretly delighted that they knew who I quote unquote like was, or had any familiarity with it. It was like a really like double-edged thing, where I was sort of like tickled and delighted that I didn't care that much about the reaction. I was just happy that I was getting to kind of make my mark one way or the other. And then it was a short time after that where I was able to sign with an indie label in Canada and start to write for this next album. And it was in that meeting Josh Ramsey, working with Tavish Crow, who became my lifelong collaborator and guitarist to this day, that Call Me Maybe was born. And that's when things started to really change for me.
When did you find out that Call Me Maybe was starting to blow up?
So it shot up in Canada first.
Yeah.
And then it shot up in
just
America
radio play.
next.
It was just a radio song in Canada, and just organically.
I was walking home from work one day, and my sister texted me. I was working at Brown's Social House, which was like a little waitressing place, kind of, I don't know. Anyways, I was walking home, and my sister texted me, and she's like, "It's so funny. Did you see this?" And I was like, "What?" And I watched the video, and I call her back, and I'm like, "That's crazy. That boy who's just singing my song online looks exactly like Justin Bieber." And she's like, "You idiot. That is Justin Bieber." And that's when Lightning kind of hit the song from somewhere unexpected. And all of a sudden I was getting hit up left, right, and center. And the song slowly kind of just was getting more attention. And it was almost like I would watch it on iTunes, and it would just like be jumping up the chart. It felt like every time we'd refresh it. And I felt really scared. I remember feeling scared more than excited, because this was not part of the plan, and I didn't know what was happening.
Tell me what happened to you in the immediate aftermath of that, because there's a narrative, which is that song became a worldwide hit. It was like 12 weeks on the U.S. #1, Billboard charts. Song of the Summer 2012. Massive global hit. It was everywhere. Did it feel like that to you? Was it like all of a sudden the world was like at your front doorstep wanting to, like, I don't know, work with you, get a piece of the action? I don't know. What was it? Was it crazy all overnight?
Yes and no. I feel like my experience versus like the world's experience of the song are very different things because I'm living my one little life. So I would sometimes get like little pockets of realizing how it's sort of affecting other people or exploding in this way. But my job was sort of just to work on getting this next album out, try to handle for the first time ever new negotiations with management and labels and just trying to do it all as intelligently as I could, considering the very little that I knew. Very early on, my thinking was, what comes after this? And how do I position myself in a place where I can have an established career beyond this song? Because this song is becoming its own little bit of a mammoth, and that's wonderful. But I want to be able to have a life of making music. So even though it was kind of wild and crazy, I was sort of thinking a couple of steps ahead of it with a bit of something resembling panic. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Scooter Braun became your manager, Justin Bieber's manager, and, you became famous, really internationally famous very quickly because there was a video and, your face was everywhere and people started to recognize you. At the same time, that song was different, was a different sound to what you had been doing and what you would eventually do. It's a great song. Don't get me wrong, but I wonder whether the expectation at that point was, okay, let's do 10 more Call Me Maybes. Like, let's just write a bunch, let's just get you with the right people and just crank out the hits.
Yeah, I think that this being one of the first pop songs that I had put out and having it work to such a degree was wild and exciting, but all the things you can imagine that go along with that. Like, wow, what's the next move here? And I know that the label probably was thinking, do the same thing again twice, but I didn't necessarily feel that pressure at the time. I felt this excitement that had been like bubbling in me my whole life, that I had this opportunity and these resources now to finally get to put out an album with some support. And so to me, it was like I was a bit of a kid in the candy shop thinking, Max Martin, the Wizard of Oz, I get to meet him, or some of these people that they were putting before me. It was exciting, but it wasn't yet daunting. I was nervous, but I was still more. Once I got my hands over into the studio, I started to feel, and I don't know how to say this without sounding a little crazy, but I'm very unsure of myself in other areas of my life. But in terms of songwriting, I've always had this weird, almost bubble around myself of confidence in this one area. And I was determined to go in there and show, for lack of a better, what I could do in some of these rooms with some of these people, which I think was the wrong energy. Because when you walk into a room with some ego or some desire to prove, you're getting in the way of good songwriting. You're not really actually facilitating the song in any way. But I had a lot of learning to do, and I was new and I was fresh, and I think that the LA way for pop artists around this time, and I'm hopeful that it's changed, was very much like, you're here to sing the song. We'll give you some publishing, but we're going to write it and we're going to tell you what to sing. And so immediately I was met with this challenge to change the dynamic in the room, which made me fight even harder to prove, wait, I got something to say, and this is what I want the session and the day to be focused around.
Well, there are a couple of things in there that you said that I'd love to explore a little bit. First of all, this idea that you went in with ego, it's hard for me to imagine because you are so, you sort of present in such a humble way and self-effacing. And so there are different degrees of ego, and I can't imagine that it was this arrogance. But what do you mean? Like, you would go into the studio and you're describing, the label would say, these are the songs, or this is the team we want you to work with, and you resisted that?
I think I went in with hunger, and it was less black and white than the label being like, here's who you work with and what we're going to do. Yeah. It was more that in certain rooms, I think that it was unusual to be a pop artist who was so new, who was also wanting to write. It was mostly, I think, there would be top liners and there would be the pop
Yes.
artists, and you sort of, I think what I experienced was a little bit of this idea that my job was to tell them about my boyfriend or my day, and then they would write a song about it for me, and I would feel included. And I was like, that's not really going to work for me, because the whole point of wanting to be an artist was actually having something that I felt was unique to say, or a different spin on some of these feelings. And I didn't really want someone else to emote for me. And so when I say I came in with ego, what I meant was I came in with like a cookie jar of ideas, just desperate to get my point across, like hopeful that someone would latch on to it. And I remember feeling that it was kind of odd that if the song that was the biggest in the world right now was working and I had been, the writer of, why were they pushing other writers into my corner? And luckily I started to realize that it was wrong of me to assume that everybody was going about it against me, that there would be some people who would be in line with it. And I started to find those people. I started to find the people who could almost make me feel like they had something to offer, but they understood I had something to offer. And our job was to figure out how those things came together that day. And I would say later on in my life, I've learned that it's even less about that. It's most about both of you getting out of the way while a good song hopefully happens to you. But at that time, the incremental lesson that I had learned was that it was good to not show up desperate to get my idea across versus open to facilitate whatever good ideas happened that day in the room.
Do you think, it's interesting because I think about, there's a version of that story that's also that really does work, right? And like we had Ryan Tedder on the show last season, and obviously super successful as the frontman of One Republic, but also a guy who's written like a bunch of number one singles for other people. Yeah, and has done exactly what you described. Goes into the studio with an artist, or Diplo we had on a similar process when he works with Madonna and others, goes in, really tries to understand the artist's perspective or point of view. And there is an argument to be made, right, that like Rae Jepsen or Taylor Swift or whoever it is sort of like the public face of a whole team of people who are all working together for that moment, and then you're delivering it, and you are, and that's all their work is sort of transmitted through you, and that can, that's obviously a very successful model.
There's no shame in that.
No,
that
not at all.
Totally works, and that is, but it's a different kind of artist than I am, and I really understand that there's value to both things. I think there are some people who are just like incredible singers and incredible front people, and I also, incredible celebrities. I don't check the boxes of being an incredible celebrity or an incredible front person or even an incredible singer. The one thing that I feel confident about is my voice in terms of songwriting. And so this is what I wanted to fight for. This is the thing I wanted to protect and have some space around. Doesn't mean I didn't want to collaborate. Doesn't mean I didn't want to like have different ideas go at a structure of sort of like a spark of something, but that I wanted to be a main player and the leader of that spark.
You felt like the value you brought was that.
Yes, exactly.
Not being a face in a video and,
I think I would do those other things because they went along with the job, but they weren't the things that excited me by any means. Yeah.
Your subsequent album, Emotion, really did do exactly that and show how you wanted to present and how you wanted to be as an artist, because it really was a departure. Really critically acclaimed, great, critics loved that record, but it was very, very different. It was, you had, obviously, there was the single I Really Like You did well, but it wasn't designed, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, to produce hit songs necessarily.
Well, it was around, I would say like, I don't know how many months into Call Me Maybe being like around the world kind of charting well, that I remember seeing articles. This is around the time that I stopped reading articles about myself ever, but even good or bad. I just stay away as much as possible. But this one had said something like one hit wonder. And I remember thinking, how do they already know that? Like, we haven't even put out a second song. But I went for this wonderful walk, and I think I've hinted that Tavish is a dear friend of mine, but this is a moment in New York, and he said, if you look at this as pressure, it's pressure. If you look at this as opportunity to have an audience that you've never had before, to show them the other stuff that I know about you, of the songwriter that you are, this is one flavor of what you do. But all the other stuff, this is your chance to do that. And I had just put out Kiss, like it was in the bag. It was like kind of getting ready to go. And I knew that I didn't know what the answer to the other sides of what I wanted to show was yet, but it was going to take some time. And that's when I decided to kind of present to Scooter, to my team, all right, I need some time. I'm going to make another album. I don't know what that looks like. And I went and did a run as Cinderella on Broadway and started to think about my next album, Emotion, basically.
So, I mean, that, as I say, I mean, that record and then your subsequent records really kind of showcased I think the music that you started to get into. And can you talk a little bit about, I mean, as you kind of went from folk early in your career to this pop explosion to, I mean, and I don't want to like categorize these genres as sort of like, this unipolar kind of sort of, musical approach in each, but I do feel like there was a sort of a transition from Kiss to your subsequent records that was more electronic, more dance music. There was a lot of interesting production. And can you kind of explain that? And maybe you can, I don't know, but kind of your evolution and how you start to think about what you want it to sound like?
Well, yeah. I had, like I said, I'd kind of thrown a little bit of a curveball to my team by saying, I'm taking a break. I'm going to figure it out. Yeah. And in the meantime, I'm going to go do this Broadway musical, Cinderella. And we were in New York, and it was, I think, an 8-month run. And I was singing Rodgers and Hammerstein every single night. And if you are familiar with like 10 minutes ago, it's very it's very sweet and soft and beautiful melodies. And I loved it. But I needed a palate cleanser when I would come home of something with some bite and edge. And that's what got me to go on these late night runs listening to Prince albums. And I was just listening to Prince for relief, for some frigging rhythm and surprise and like punch. And the juxtaposition of Rodgers and Hammerstein and Prince was a really funny time of my life. And I got so excited about, I think what they both did though, both writers are getting into, or all of the writers are getting into immediate, like when I say cut to the feeling, and that's not but like hard on your sleeve emotions. And that's what I really loved about 80s. And I think when I started to look at what it was, or ask myself the question, what is it that I like about pop? Because growing up in these folk kind of influenced families, and then like Call Me Maybe working out, like I am looking at the genre of pop with such curiosity. And I saw it as, to me, the ultimate love-hate genre. Because when I hear a pop song, I have an extreme reaction. I think we all do. I either love a pop song or I hate a pop song. And there is very little in between where I'm like, I could take it or leave it. It's a passionate genre of music, which makes it scary to play with because the stakes are very high. And I was really excited about Prince's take on some of these songs. I was really excited about seeing what I could do if I were to play in 80s. And then in fairness to these like chance meetings with different collaborators, like I said, I'd been exploring like the menu of LA and the different people in there. I started to find the people I aligned with where there was mutual respect, where we all found places to meet in the middle of the types of music that we were attracted to at the time. And I just would lean into those collaborations. And I think around the time that the song Emotion was born, I had been experimenting more indie, more kind of like trying to figure out some stuff. I'd done some stuff with Tegan and Sarah. I kind of made a sort of an album that I wasn't sure where it was going to go. But once I landed on that song Emotion, I felt, okay, this was a bit of a key to unlock the album for me. And then I was a little bit off to the races, and the rest sort of came together pretty smoothly after that. Once I wrapped up Cinderella, I met some more producers in Stockholm and finished the making of Emotion. Yeah.
Tell me about how you collaborate with some of the people that you worked with, like Ryan or Josh or Tavish, or even like Rostam from Vampire Weekend, who you worked with on a bunch of tracks. How do you when you come together to work with somebody, and maybe you can talk about a specific example from the record Emotion or any of your other records. How do you start? How do you begin the process? There's a blank slate, and then what do you do?
Well, it's been the great fascination of my life to say that I'm constantly learning more about the art and craft of songwriting and collaborating. And I think that's why it's such a cool career, is that I don't think you can ever learn it all. I think that there's so much to be a sponge about. And this is what excited me when I first was in LA, is I said yes to every session, because even if I didn't have a song that I left with some sort of new intel or like skill, or just like a way to not go at it, or a way to go, or what worked from that. And I was really taking it in like a student who was just like hungry to learn from some of the greats. And I knew I loved lyrics. I knew I loved melodies. I knew that I had some sort of stuff, but I knew that I didn't know everything, and that I never would be able to. And so I feel like in those years I did take in a lot. I would say that it's a hard question to answer completely and summarize, because there's no one way about it. I think to be really adaptable to different rooms, to different personalities. If it's a day where there's not much coming naturally, I will sometimes take an old personal idea that I've had and kind of share it, and then kind of workshop it together in the room. So I have like what I call like my cookie jar of ideas.
Yeah.
If we have a tired day. But my favorite thing to do is to start fresh. I think it's important to have a friend connection in the room. I think these are the ingredients for a good song. Here's what I'll say. A friend connection is really good. That you check your ego at the door, all of you. So you're not there to be the winner of the most ideas that day, but you're there to kind of just see what happens. That you find where you meet in the middle in terms of things that you like. So if I'm writing a song that I love, but the producer has no interest, I don't think we're going to get anything good. So if we both love, like that song you mentioned earlier, from The Loveliest Time, the opening track. But if we both love the roots and different things, that might be a good starting place for us. And then I think also when you have friendships that have been built over years, the really cool extra thing that gets added to that ingredients list is an understanding of everyone's strengths and everyone's weaknesses. And I would say that I kind of more dominate top lines, which are like more like melodies and lyrics. And I production is not my forte. I can have opinions and throw things out or know when I want it to stop and start, but I will let someone else take over that. I love that we can all challenge an idea, but I also love that it feels safe enough to go explore on an adventure in any one direction and check it out before we turn around and say, never mind, that was crazy, and come back again. And so it is a very childlike energy of being able to explore together and play together. And then I think the rest, to me, I think that there's a great songwriter who said, I don't know how songwriting happens. And I really second that too, because a lot of it, if you're in the right space, feels sort of like magic. And that's why I keep coming back to it as like my favorite thing to do in the whole world.
I'm curious about this idea of having a friend in the room, because in 2022 you released 2 albums in a short period of time, The Loneliest Time and The Loveliest Time. And I want to ask about The Loneliest Time first. I mean, the title says it all. That was written during the pandemic. And what was going on? I mean, you mentioned this idea of having a friend in the room, collaborating, working with people. Were you not? I mean, many people were not able to do that. Were you isolated?
I was. I think The Loneliest Time was such a downer title in some ways, but felt quite powerful to just call it what it was. I sort of played with other things, but I was like, I think also kind of being thought of as like Call Me Maybe Girl and Sweet and all these sort of expectations of almost happiness and sunshine around it. It felt quite rebellious to just be like, well, it's been the loneliest time. And it has. And I think I'm not alone in that. But what excited me about the theme of loneliness was that connection could be found in even that there was a feeling that I was having the loneliest time, but maybe the listener was as well.
Yeah.
And that healing could come from just being honest about the experience and maybe not so shameful about what that is. And I don't look at the pandemic as the one time in my life I've been lonely. I think that we are all, as humans and adults, experiencing loneliness even when we're in relationships, even when we're surrounded by people and family. And it is something to face in our life because it can be really dangerous if it's not handled with care. And I definitely have learned so much about myself, so much about my weaknesses, my strengths, and where I can improve in life. And this album was very much about the discovery of facing my loneliness, finding the beauty in it. And in the writing of this, to answer your question more directly, I did a lot of Zoom sessions. So I was technically alone, but I was alone with another man who was alone in Venice, and that's Lewis of Man, who was stuck in a room as well. And we would be in our pajamas together. And sometimes he would just send me a track and I would alone write to it, and then I would send it back to him, and it became this tag like love letter of songwriting that went back and forth. And hey, what do you think if we shorten this part, or I added this new part over here? And I would sing. And I set up a little studio during COVID in my office space with the help of like my father and Tavish on Zoom, of like putting a mic together and learning how to become my own like very poor vocal engineer. And I started writing a lot from home, and it was a salvation to me. It was like the absolute thing that got me through.
How much of that record was a reflection of what you were going through? Because I know that there were members of your family who you lost during that time. I think you had a relationship that ended around that time. So how much of you and what you were going through was reflected in those songs?
I think it allowed a layer of a different kind of honesty to be in isolation and write. Even I think to be in the room alone. And to be writing sometimes with people who weren't necessarily there. It felt more like writing a journal entry in a way. And I think there was also safety in the fact that as I was writing these songs, I would sometimes say to myself, but don't worry, this one's just for me. Or like, no one will hear this. Like, I'm writing this for therapy's sake, but like, I'll keep it to myself afterwards. I know it's not appropriate to share. And then I would find myself when the world was opening up and we were thinking about putting out some music again. And that time came from my A&R from the label to come over and my managers to come over and sort of sit in the patio and take a listen to what I'd been working on. I started the meeting by playing all of the expected songs. And I am kind of classically known by my team as an overwriter. So I if I need to have an album of say 12 or 15, I will generally have 200 songs that I've written that could be presented.
I think there are 13 songs on the record. So you would have written 200 songs.
I think that might be an over-exaggerating for this one, but I would say probably 150 or something quite ridiculous. Yes, I go in, I go hard, and it's mostly that I really mean that I like love writing. I can't not write. I find myself doing it for no reason when nothing is due. It's just a part of my life, and so I had. I started to show them, I guess, what I thought were the presentable songs, the more expected songs. And at the very end, I was like, I did do this one. And I think it came from a craving of really being seen, maybe too. But it felt safe in this group, in this dynamic. And I started to play Benz. And Benz is actually a song we had lost. I have to be like careful when I talk about we lost my cousin. And I had written this song almost to process the night we had discovered the news, because I was together with the rest of my cousins in Mexico City, and it was such a shock to all of us to lose him and to kind of know where to put that information. He was my age, almost identically, and we grew up together, tree forts, all the kind of stuff. And he was like my next door neighbor for a while too. So we had kind of gone out swimming by the demand of my uncle, who I think had had enough experience with grief to kind of lead the group of my family that day, and demanded that tonight, to honor my cousin, we would go into the water as a family, and we would just be in the water together and pick out a star and have a moment. And so we went, and there were all these phosphorescents in the water that night. And I was so hit by what it was to be in water, which feels quite healing, and to be crying and to be looking at other people I loved who were also crying, and to just not have just isolated into our rooms in that hurt place. It didn't fix everything, but it was so necessary to be in it and feel it together. And I needed to it was so affected by the choice to do that in that moment, to go for the swim, to be in water, to be close to family, to cry publicly, all kind of crazy things. And I think my uncle that day taught us a beautiful lesson about what it was to begin the process of healing yourself, or at least feeling what you need to be feeling, however hard it is. And I wanted to write about it. And in this moment, at this meeting, I play bends for them, and I don't tell them what it's about. And I just see if they can pick it up, and I'm almost hopeful that they can't. And they were moved enough to make it feel safe to show others. And that's when I started to, show Far Away and things like Collage, which was going to be for the Loveliest time, and some of my sadder, more private songs. And I almost was taught a lesson in that moment, that here I am sort of preaching the idea that you can feel everything, but not giving myself my own permission to feel those things too. Yeah.
It strikes me. It's so I just thinking about the process of writing that record, The Loneliest Time, which was written largely during COVID, and it comes out in 2022. But you were also writing the subsequent album around that time too, The Loveliest Time. Maybe some of those songs came later. So there was this kind of juxtaposition. You would have this lonely record and this the lovely songs too. Was there sort of a thematic break? Like, was there a moment where you're like, okay, I've written my lonely songs, now I need to write the lovely songs?
Well, you've just tapped into the two things that I think music is for me. And for me, it's permission to feel whatever you're actually feeling in a safe place. That's one. And that was The Loneliest Time.
Yeah.
Feel what's actually going on. Indulge in it. Allow your sadness to become beautiful, even in music. And then the other one is the good old-fashioned escapism. Dream your worries away. Just go to another place and let's escape there together. And imagination is fantastical and healing too, and you can do that. And in that lonely time, I imagined the loveliest time and what that would look like when the world opened up, and when I was newly in love again, and when I was all these things that I imagined for myself, when I felt excited to be at a festival and to feel big things.
But you were imagining those things. You weren't there yet, right?
No, I was not there yet.
Yeah.
No, not at all. And it has been the trip of my life that since the world has opened up, that I have fallen wildly in love, that I have got to go and live some wild experiences. And it's almost like art happened before life, like life imitates art, that I have like imagined these things, and then all of a sudden I'm singing them and there's new meaning to the words I'm saying. It has just like thrown me for the biggest curveball you can imagine.
Carly, you like the story that could have been told about you was that the song would have come out, and that would have been, the label would have dropped you, and that would have been the end of your career. And that's happened to many, many artists. And here you are, more than 12 years after that song came out, really, 14 years since you really launched, 15 years since you launched your career, and you are, critically acclaimed. Your last record's in the top 20, 50 albums of the year and so many lists. You have built an enduring career, and you have a long career ahead of you. When you think about how your sound has evolved over time, and I think it's just been natural. It's been a natural, organic evolution of sounds. connected to what you've been listening to or what you want to experiment with. But when you think about where you're headed, like, I don't know, just off the top of my head, I think of Madonna. Like, every record she made was different. Every single record sounded like a different artist, which is, and some of them were more successful and some of them less successful, but it's what makes her so interesting, that she really puts herself out there. What do you imagine, just like you imagined the loveliest time when it wasn't the loveliest time, what do you imagine you sound like in 5 or 10 years from now?
I don't know. I think that I think about my career and my life a little bit more blended than I did maybe in my 20s. And so I see the whole picture as this like interesting and important balancing act, which I know sounds less like maybe the answer that you're looking for.
No,
but
no answer.
I do feel like it comes back to that question of success to me and what that really defines. And to me, it's like I really want to have a happy and joyful life. And my career is a part of that. But I feel like the two things fuel each other, because when some people are very melancholy, I write the best when I'm happy and feeling healthy and feeling kind of like able to like give. And so I'm kind of looking at just making sure I have good connections going on in my life, that, absolutely I want to be able to keep learning about this craft of songwriting. I think I would love to grow the audiences in a way where I can put on the most delightful show that I can. But above and beyond that, I think what I've found the freedom in with experiments like putting out The Loneliest Time and The Loveliest Time is that to my delight and surprise, my audience is not expecting one thing from me. They've really allowed the grace and the space for me to play and to show all the colors of the music that I'm interested in, and to redefine even what pop is in my own kind of narrow definition of it, that it can be a little 90s, it can be 70s, I can play in a disco, and then I can go over here and I can really do something almost experimental and jazzy. And to be able to play like that is, I think, the gift of all gifts. So where that takes me and where that goes, and whether or not I'll have like a baby in my hip the next time we talk, those are all like TBD. But I think that I want to look at the full picture and think of my success as sort of that the songs will be the legacy, hopefully, more than anything, versus like necessarily how I sound on them, but that the songs will hopefully last longer than I do, and that's my goal.
That's awesome. Carly, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It was nice to talk to you.
Hey, it's Guy, and I hope you enjoyed this conversation. For more like it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. And for the audio version, just open up your favorite podcast app, search for The Great Creators, and tap follow.